Henry Kissinger was Nixon's most evil henchman, responsible for advising Nixon to bomb civilian targets in Vietnam from 1969 to 1972, a massive incendiary bombing that killed 500,000 Vietnamese. Kissinger was responsible for the invasion of Cambodia that led to the destabilization that made Pol Pot's rise inevitable. Kissinger, incredibly, was awarded the 1973 Nobel Prize for ending the Vietnam War, permanently discrediting the Peace Prize. While Kissinger was receiving his Peace Prize in October 1973, he was directing the CIA-led overthrow of the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in Chile and installing the dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet, with several hundred killed in this U.S.-led coup. Talk about ironies. Well, Daniel Ellsberg was a psychiatrist employed at Rand Corporation and a researcher, and traumatized by what was contained in the Pentagon Papers, a worker there confided to Ellsberg the horrifying contents. Ellsberg retrieved the 7,000 pages out of a high-security safe, photocopied all 7,000 pages, and gave them to the New York Times and the Washington Post, who published them. Over 1 million copies of the Pentagon Papers were sold in 1 month in 1972 alone. Said Ellsberg, quote, "I was willing to do anything nonviolent and truthful. I realized that the one thing I could do was copy the study I had on the origins of the war. I had 7,000 pages of top-secret documents in my safe at the Rand Corporation, evidence of a century of aggression, broken treaties, deception, stolen elections, and murders. I had proof of it all." End quote. By the way, that's a quote from the book Patriots, The Vietnam War Remembered from All Sides by Christian G. Appy. Sure makes me wonder what's in those 6,000 pages of the Canadian government's Emery Papers. I'm sure both the U.S. government as well as the Canadian government has their file of 6,000 pages. A U.S. journalist ought to put in a Freedom of Information request to the U.S. government for all its documents on the case against Marc Emery. It's certain to reveal over a decade of prohibitionist hallucinations, deceptions, lies, and illegalities laid out in clear detail. You know, Canadian Member of Parliament Louis Davies has an order paper request for those 6,000 pages of the Emery Papers on the floor of the House of Commons from September 27th. Legally, it must be produced within 45 days, and that was due November 12th, sometime last week. Davies wants to see those 6,000 pages uncensored, to see what collusion the Canadian government and its agencies and police have engaged in with what is likely to be the worst, most evil forces within the U.S. government. Ostensibly, over one man, me, who published magazines, videos, told the truth, empowered a generation of activists to pursue the truth, distributed seeds in perhaps the most remarkable peaceful revolution of our modern times. I'm sure these 6,000 Emery paper pages, if we can ever see them uncensored, will be as intellectually nauseating and morally exhausting as it was reading Nixon's own recorded conversations. For both the Vietnam War and the drug war today come from the same delusional, unhinged, anti-life, end-of-days mentality of Richard Nixon. Nixon decided to wage war on the young people who led the opposition to his genocidal war in Vietnam. It was the marijuana culture and their pacifism at home in the USA and among the soldiers in Vietnam that Nixon and McCaffrey blamed for the failure in Vietnam. Nixon's enduring legacy is the drug war, the pot smokers as the Viet Cong, a view continued by Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, George W., and now Obama, to its natural conclusion that Marc Emery is the Ho Chi Minh bringing the seeds of freedom to overgrow the imperial U.S. prison military death machine. Except for the problem for the U.S. federal government is that I, first and foremost, am an acolyte of Ayn Rand and Ron Paul, and the principles those two articulate in their great works. I am anything but Che Guevara or Uncle Ho. My heroes for my entire life are all Americans. Ayn Rand, Ron Paul, Thomas Jefferson, Lysander Spooner, Martin Luther King Jr., Clarence Darrow, Thomas Edison. Not any communist or anti-American rebel. No smear is ever going to taint my life's work dedicated to individual liberty and the rights of man. My 30 years of transparent, principled advocacy of liberty is clear and well documented. Watch my hundreds of YouTube, Pot TV videos. Read those 74 issues of Cannabis Culture magazine. Consider where that $4 million I gave away went to. All peaceful democratic institutions, political parties, politicians, activists, lobbyists, rallies, marches, court actions. Not a gun, bullet, explosive was ever paid for with my money. Just pens, printing presses, gardening advice, peaceful demonstrations. The stuff America was made of at its most ideal in its origins. Even George Washington, the first president of the Republic, was a prodigious cannabis farmer and seed distributor who indeed overgrew the British Empire himself. When the 6,000 pages of the Emery Papers are one day revealed uncensored, we will see that the inner workings of the police state that secretly watches us all and controls our lives. Who knows what names of high-ranking officials, spies, informers, as well as those spied upon, will be revealed in those top-secret pages. I talked to many, many people in those 10 years who knows what was being spied upon and who was being spied upon. Revealing what is in the Emery Papers will expose the existence of the secret North American national security marijuana police that fights a culture war on behalf of our two quickly integrating governments of Canada and the USA. 6,000 pages is bigger than the U.S. government's file on John Lennon, even bigger than the file the FBI kept on Martin Luther King Jr. The scope of the Emery Papers, all 6,000 pages classified, marked national security, with every one of its approximately 3 million words blacked out, is breathtaking, possibly the biggest spy job these two governments have ever pulled off. Millions of dollars, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars, has been spent on one man whose pitch is essentially, think for yourself. If anyone in the cosmos still needs proof that the authority fear marijuana more than anything else, that person would only need to look at the mere existence of the Emery Papers. The lies and corruption in those 6,000 pages have cost countless lives and incalculable suffering. These lies are so obvious and damning that the government knows it has to black out every word. Any action will be taken to stop the freedom of thought that marijuana represents, according to our two governments. The actual uncensored pages, read in their whacked-out entirety, will reveal the diseased and warped thinking of those who pursue prohibition, that's for sure. Reading the 6,000 pages of the government's top-secret Emery files will be like reading something out of the Salem witch trials. The Emery Papers will have the logic and mood of a Jim Jones sermon at the People's Temple. Imagine how many other pages and memos and investigations into the Canadian cannabis culture are out there that no one knows about. The drug war drives the U.S. imperial empire and its manifest destiny. That is why drugs are insinuated in all U.S. occupations, invasions, and subversions, from Vietnam to Afghanistan to Colombia to Bolivia to Mexico. It drives Stephen Harper's re-election strategy to establish an unprecedented prison state in Canada. Both the Bush administration and the Harperites have these end-of-times nuts driving the drug war, as did Reagan, Bush Sr., and Nixon. Now the Harperites have written it all down in overblown national security-only prose only a book of revelations-inspired fanatic can deliver. Daniel Ellsberg said what made the Pentagon Papers a big deal was Nixon's opposition to its release, just as the Harper government has opposed releasing a single word of the 6,000 pages of the Emery Papers. Those who are listening to me now must insist that all 6,000 of those pages be released, uncensored and complete. Demand that your member of Parliament tell the government of Stephen Harper and the fundamentalist ministers he has in his cabinet, Stockwell Day, the Minister of Public Safety, Peter Van Loan, and Attorney General Rob Nicholson, to release the Emery Papers uncensored. To what degree is the secret U.S.-Canada National Security Marijuana Police Network spying on Canadian citizens? You'll need to see the Emery Papers to find out. How many laws have been broken by governments and police during this decade-long production of Orwell's 1984